I've got to say this a couple of times because there's a delayed startup, but anyway, we're at the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania here in Hobart, getting ready for Mark Slats as our next entrant to come through the boat shed film drop. So we'll keep you updated on ETAs. Very hard to pick. And last night, of course, at early morning, 3 o'clock this morning, had an unexpected phone call from him, and he wasn't too distressed, but he said, "Hey, I've been knocked down twice in the last few hours." And I looked as if I might have cracked a rib or something. Anyway, he really just wanted to know about the weather because the forecasting had suggested it would only be about 15 knots, 10 to 15 knots. And he was getting 35 knots. So it was a short, steep 3-metre sea, not a big sea, just a nasty one coming from the south. And he was surprised. So we had a bit of a chat. I explained about the weather. He didn't need any assistance or anything. He wasn't even really worried about his cracked rib. There's not a lot you can do with that when it happens. You know, if you've got a cracked rib, you can strap it up, but there's no real first aid you can do. So he's just carrying on regardless right now. The forecast is for it to be dropping off. You'll see that on the tracker. And he'll probably be becalmed tomorrow, you know, it's that sort of thing. So makes it very hard to pick an ETA, but I would think he's probably going to be in maybe Sunday, possibly Monday. But as he gets closer, we'll get a bit more accurate. There's plenty of wind coming after the next couple of days, so he could be as early as Saturday, who knows. Jean-Luc streaming away in the distance there, doing really well. He is consistently at least a knot faster every time I look at him in any breeze. You know, you get a feel for these things, and I'm watching the boats all the time, and you look at the weather forecast and look at what Windy TY is saying, and Jean-Luc's doing a knot more than I would have expected. So today he was doing 7.5 knots, just creaming along. So he's making very good time, you know, on the whole issue. Bit further back, Uku doing average speeds in average weather right now. He thinks he's going to be in on the 30th. I reckon he's going to be in about the 28th. He's only 600 miles behind Mark Slats. That's not 6 days, you know, so we'll watch this space. Susie had a fantastic weekend. Some of the best sailing she's had in a long time, really fast. She said she was a bit overpowered, but happy to be doing it, and you know, looking forward to getting to Hobart. We're probably going to have to delay our departure from here now, so that's a necessity. So we'll be here for Susie, and hopefully we'll get Istvan and Tapio as well. They're both heading south for some reason. Obviously they've got a northwesterly breeze which is pushing them down, but I'm surprised they're dipping below, so far below 40 already. They're getting close to the zone, and it'll be interesting to watch. There is I'll just mention there's a bit of a blow coming for Susie if you walk the weather forward, and I'll be doing a live tracker update tonight, probably in about another 8 hours or so, and explain what's going on. But there is a blow coming for Susie in about 3 days. I've just advised her to head on up towards 39 south. She's been going below 40, so you might see her do that over the next day or two. It's still 3 days away. It looks like it's not going to affect anyone else in the fleet, so I haven't advised them. It's just Susie right now. And going further back, Loic just trundling along, doing great. No dramas, just keeps it going. He's got good, consistent speeds, so he seems to be pretty happy. And then at the tail end, there's Mark Sinclair and Igor again. Igor this morning was going too slow. I'm not sure why, but I am now officially watching Igor. I'm assuming he's okay, but maybe he's got some other issues that are making him go a bit slower than one would expect. Mark Sinclair's just trying to get into a tactical position to increase his easting, you might say, but they're not going to have much luck in the next few days. The weather coming out of there is very inconsistent. It's going to be light and frustrating, so that distance is going to grow. And I looked at some numbers this morning. Jean-Luc took 65 days to get where Mark Sinclair is right now, and Mark's taken 106 days. That's the difference. Now the boats aren't that much slower. It's a tactical thing. It's a reason why you're there. You know, why you're doing this, that, and the other. It's a completely different attitude, but it's a huge contrast, and people are starting to talk about it around the world. And I've got a couple of questions on that subject as well, which I'll get to right now. So a few interesting questions. Nick Wilson mentions that once again Gregor Brand and his boat, who's responsible? Basically, the skipper or owner of the boat is responsible. There's an interesting thing developing now, because he wanted to scuttle the boat, but he couldn't because of the marine park that was around Amsterdam Island and St. Paul. So he had to button it up and let it drift. But we've just had an official notice from RCC in Australia just wondering what's going on. Is there any efforts underway to recover the boat, salvage it or whatever? So we'll wait and see what Gregor has to say about that, because I've had to pass that official request on. As you know, Tommy is actually now recovering from a big operation. It was a 2-hour operation on his back. They'll announce exactly what the issues were, but it was quite serious. But he's going to get fully recovered. Serious in the sense that it could have been a lot worse. So that press conference will be sometime later this week. Next question from Nick was, what dangers are involved with trailing warps in terms of setting them and recovering them? Warps are one of the easiest, because it's just literally streaming a bight of rope. So you tie it off on one side of the boat and then just let it run out in a bight, in a loop, and just keep it streaming. So when you want to recover it, it's the same again. Sometimes the ropes twist and stuff, and you might get a wrap up, which is hard to pull in, but it's certainly a lot simpler than using a drogue, which is one of the other reasons that trailing warps is used maybe more often, because you can set it and recover it so simply. Next one from Nick was, everyone's got a different attitude about towing warps, heaving to, laying a hull and so on, but specifically to heaving to, he asked the question, when does it not work? Well, basically, it may not work at any time because the boat is exposed. And you've got to remember that most people sail everywhere else except the Southern Ocean. And what I'm referring to there, they're in the Atlantic Ocean, they're in the Pacific, they're in wherever. And there is a real place for heaving to. You know, that's when you're back when you head sail and the boat just hovers and drifts sideways a little bit. So when's it not safe? Generally, this is my personal opinion, it's not safe to do it in the Southern Ocean, end of story. This is my personal opinion. I'd do everything else but hove to in the Southern Ocean. The extreme waves and swell and so on are very demanding, and any time the boat's not moving, it's a sitting duck, you know, potentially a sitting duck. And often when you want to hove to, it's because either you've got headwinds and you don't want to go backwards. That's an interesting challenge. Or you've got something wrong with the boat, or you need to sleep or whatever. But boy, personally, I would try everything but hoving to, because you know, you are exposed to knockdowns, rollovers, all that sort of stuff when you do that. But as I say, we'll all be talking to skippers when they get back, and there'll be some interesting and fascinating stories there on that whole thing. Okay, Roger Martin, VDH, distant to the finish. There was a sudden sudden inconsistency of about 1,000 miles when he left Hobart. The Yellowbick tracker is really good. You know, all the features it gives, it's fantastic and fun to play with. You know, you can sit there a long time, you know, looking at all the different input informations, you know, wave height, you know, currents, barometric pressure, temperatures, things like that. But it's challenging for the software program. We're the only ones that have ever used this program for an around the world race. The reason we're using it, because Yellowbrick have provided it to us, and we didn't have to pay a huge amount of money. If we had $35,000 or so, we could have written a dedicated software program which would be very sophisticated. This one, the program is designed to go over one ocean, and something like the Atlantic. Okay, we've got an around the world race, so it's segmented into basically 4 legs, from France down to Cape Town, that's one, and then into Hobart, that's another one. Then you step into the next one, which is the last 2, and it looks like there was a transition there from once you get into Hobart, that sort of finishes that leg of the race, you swap over. It created some inconsistencies. There are challenges with the distance to finish versus distance to sail. Sometimes it's not perfectly accurate, but we're all trying to do the best we can. So if you see that, don't get too hung up on it. We're trying to sort it out and make it as good as we can. If you want to know the distance between one boat and another one, don't just look at the distance to finish and subtract it and see what it says. Use the measuring tool. That, I can guarantee you, is perfectly accurate, and so you'll be able to see exactly what's going on. And we'll try and keep up to it and keep it as accurate as we can, because I know you all enjoy all the statistics, but yeah, we have some challenges there, and we'll do our best. Corrie and Willem Stern were asking. They had an interesting theory. They're sailing a Joshua boat. Interestingly, one of the Meta Joshuas around the world, just having fun, cruising, living on board, adventuring, things like that. And they've been knocked down a few times on their Joshua. They used Hanks sails, and they're quite happy with that. They mentioned that when the rigs have been lost on the boats, that they're all using furling gears, and she was thinking that maybe, I wonder if the sails unfurled when it was underwater, putting huge loads on the rig, and then the rig collapses underwater. What was my opinion? I don't think that's the case at all. Firstly, because they wouldn't get the chance to rip out. The sheets would have been the same. Nothing's changed. So my opinion is it probably didn't happen. She says that if they were Hanks, that may not happen, things like this. And so, I don't know, the driving issue there is what you want to sail with. Do you want to sail when the mast is upright with Hanks or furling gear? Make that decision, and then after that, in relation to a rollover, you take it as it comes. But I don't think there's any one's more safe or less safe or more likely to pull your mast down than leave it up. So Justin Wood, it was interested that when Mark Slatz went down to 40 degrees south, which is the no-go zone, he literally bounced off the border, and he asked the question, how come he could do that? Because he would have been working under celestial navigation, and the DR side of it would have been a bit average. In actual fact, we inform the entrants when they get somewhere between 41, once they cross 41 degrees south, as soon as we see it, we will send them a message and tell them exactly what their latitude is, and say you've only got 60 miles to go to the boundary or 30 miles to go to the boundary. The reason we do that is because in the 1968 they didn't have that no-go zone, so it's like giving them at least a bit of a chance. And there is a very sound reason why we've got the no-go zone there, and that's to keep the fleet up a bit high, keep them out of the worst of the weather, also keep them at a distance where if something happened and they did need a rescue, we were within touch for the rescue facilities or services coming from either Australia or from Australia or Reunion or from South Africa and so on. If you go too far south, which is the Great Circle route, the shortest distance you can go, which would save them time, they're mixing it up with the big storms, and it could be a long way. It could be impossible to get to them if they needed a rescue. So that's why the no-go zone is there, and that's why they can be accurate at the last bit. Stephen Eddy asked through a left field question to us, will there be a Jean-Luc class in the 2022 race for the really super fast boats? And is his speed versus the slow boats an issue for 2022? I can see what he's coming to, but there won't be a Jean-Luc class, even though he's a bit of a guru. But yes, it's from an organiser perspective and safety and a few other things, it's nice to keep the fleet together. You remember I was saying when we had Gregor, Tommy, Uku and Mark Slatz all in there mucking it together, I was excited about that because we've got different sorts of boats and they're all doing similar sort of speeds, and I think the reason for that group was they've got similar mindset. Sure, Susie's in there as well, but she had a tactical issue, got a little bit behind. Tapio has been travelling with challenges all the time because his boat wasn't quite sorted when he left, and some of his equipment's been letting down. Istvan had issues at the beginning but's caught up a lot, but generally they're all in it with the spirit of their racing. Okay, now in the original Golden Globe race, sure, the boats were a mixed up lot, but there was a determination to go as fast as you could safely and get around to either be first or break a record. When you come to the back end of the fleet, which is the big split, Igor's got some problems. He's got challenges. But he wants to race, but he can't. That's pretty obvious. In Mark Sinclair's case, he's having a nice time. He's doing his own thing. That's fine. That was within the sort of theme of getting around the world. But yeah, it is different than the others. Can we do anything about that, or do we want to do anything about that? The answer to both of those is no. The Golden Globe will always be different things to different people, and we let it run. There's no finishing time, and it's up to them. But certainly, it's a surprise to everyone. You might have heard Jean-Luc's phone call today. A couple of days ago, yesterday. On SoundCloud. If you haven't heard it, you want to listen to it. He couldn't believe it. He found out where the boats were and how far the split was. It's over 5,000 miles or something, which is beyond belief, and he was quite surprised, so it's worth listening to his phone call. Okay, Margaret Keys wondered, when is it not good to go through the strait between Stewart Island and the southern tip of New Zealand? If you were following it, you would have seen Jean-Luc going through there at night time. And even I thought, well, that's a gutsy call. But the good news was the weather was reasonable. And I put myself in that situation. Thought, would have I done that? And I said, yeah, I would have. If you're entering it in daylight, so you're coming in to start, so you've got a good point of reference. You've got a reasonable amount of lights there, but not a lot getting out. And, Sue Haley did it. Robert Knox Johnson did it when he went through. So I would have done the same. The difference of not going through it is like another day sailing, really, because you've got to go around the bottom, or if you're looking the other way, around the bottom and then head up again. When's it not safe? Well, when it's not safe to do that is when it's not safe. If there's a big storm raging and you've got big headwinds, there's some tricky currents in there, and wind against tide could be challenging if it's huge. Jean-Luc had pretty mild, moderate weather. He had about 20, 25 knots, but he said it was a tough call, especially coming out the other side. So, when's it not safe? Well, it's not safe when the skipper makes a decision whether he's going through or not. Simple as that. So. Anyway, moving on. Will Igor and Mark have enough... I'm not sure who that was. Will Igor and Mark have enough food to get around? They're so slow. Interesting point. I think Mark has always said he could be out there for 300 days. So I think Mark's okay. I know Igor took 600 packets of cigarettes, so that means he must have a lot of food too. So I would assume at this stage, yes, if they didn't get back until April the 22nd, which is the prize giving, and we hope everyone's in by then, they should have enough food to get there, so I'm not really worried about it. And they'll ration it if they think they're going slow as well. Okay, so the time box penalty. Okay, so if the boat goes through into the no-go zone, for every hour they're inside the no-go zone, they get a 2-hour time penalty. So if they're down there for 10 hours, they get a 20-hour time penalty. And when do they serve that time penalty? Not just whenever they want. So if they're becalmed one day, they say, oh, can I have my time penalty now? It's not until they get nearly all the way back. And in fact, I didn't look at the notice of race, but I think when you get to 45 degrees north latitude, which is only a day or two from Les Sables d'Olonne, you have to sail up to the 45 degrees north latitude, I think it is. And when you cross over the line, you then have to turn around and go below the line. Okay, and once you go below the line, you have to then serve your time penalty below the line, so you have to stay down there for 20 hours, say, if it's a time penalty. And when you cross back up through 45 degrees north again, you have to be within 60 miles of where you went through north. So you'll see anyone that's got a time penalty, you'll see them serve that time penalty just at the last few days before they get into the finish. So that's how that works. Okay. Okay. So here's a good question. I don't know who asked the question. Anyway, the question is: so far from this race, what changes will there be made in 2022? Okay, there's a few changes I'll tell you about now. One is that if you looked at Gregor's boat, it was a vinyl wrap, it wasn't a paint job, and half of it was missing. It's all peeled off and it's floating around the ocean now somewhere. So we're banning vinyl wraps on boats. There's a few people who have done it, and if it's done properly, it's okay. And there is now apparently a biodegradable vinyl wrap. It costs a lot more. We might consider that later on, but in principle for the 22 race there'll be no vinyl wraps. That's not to say that painting is any more environmentally friendly. We're not trying to justify that. All we're saying is that it appears that vinyl wraps aren't a good thing for the environment. The other one is that we said for years the idea of putting a bed strap on the settee berths in the boat. Some entrants are sleeping in quarter berths down under the cockpit, and if a boat rolls over in that situation, you are a bit secure. You're not going to get thrown too far. But a lot are actually sleeping in settee berths in the middle of the boat. And if the boat gets knocked down, you can get thrown out, or if it rolls over, it's even worse. And we advised everyone to put in bunk straps, and not to the best of my knowledge, no one really did. And certainly it's a risk, and injury is a problem. So there will be a mandatory requirement to have some sort of security arrangement in the bunks, in the settee berths, to make sure you don't get thrown out. Next one is HF radios. I've been saying for 3 years to all the entrants, waterproof your HF radios. The HF radio is very important. It's important for safety, it's important for talking to other entrants, it's important for weather reports, for time signals, and I kept stressing it, but no one did. And boy, there's a lot of drowned radios in this race. So the next one, it will be a mandatory requirement to have your HF radio plus your emergency transceiver secured in a watertight box. It's very easy to do. You just build a fiberglass box with a hinged perspex lid, and on the bottom of it you just put a dinghy inspection port, a round plastic inspection port, and you have waterproof glands at the back of it where all your aerial cables and power comes in. And if you want to use your radio, you unscrew your wing nuts, open up the plastic door at the front, take the screw inspection port out the bottom, and that lets air run through because they generate a lot of heat, and you just use your radio. And in fact, you leave it open nearly all the time, but if there's a storm coming, you shut the flap, put the screw in, it's waterproof, so when the water's rushing around inside your boat, your radio's still going to work. So that'll be mandatory for 22. The next one is and emergency, can't even read my own writing. There's another one there, but I can't think of what it is. Anyway, there'll be a few little changes like that, which will be interesting for cruising people as well. So, why can't I read my own writing? Emergency something. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Paul Clark, are you surprised by the different strategies within the GGR? Mark's at the back, any plans to do that? I've already mentioned that. So, no, I'm not surprised. It's a great race. It's an adventure. It's everything associated with sailing and pushing yourself to the limit to go around. And we'd always encourage that. We're not going to say you have to race around and put all your effort in being first or anything like that. It doesn't work that way. So the GGR is what it is. Dan Medu said, John Luke has got some bad weather coming. Do you think he'll miss it? There is some strong winds coming, and it's in a way it's as we have been suggesting for a long time. The Indian Ocean is really nasty, especially the first half of the Indian Ocean, because you have the influence of the Agulhas Current and the weather systems coming down from the top. You've got a big Indian Ocean high that squashes up the systems over to the western side of the Indian Ocean. It's earlier in the season. There's all sorts of issues that make the Indian Ocean incredibly challenging. As you get over in the Pacific, it's a bit more organised. There's no other weather patterns. It's just the Pacific and getting further south. And as we said, you'll find they get bigger. So they'll be thousands of miles across. There'll be massive big bands going, and you won't usually see the same number of little systems there, little tight, vicious, nasty little storms. And that's, there's some big systems there right beside Jean-Luc right now. He's running along the edge, going very fast, 7.5 knots, having a great time, not letting up. He wants to get home as quick as he can, and we'll just sort of watch this space. So that's really about it. Thanks for all the comments and emails and bits and pieces that keep coming in, and we'll look forward to having some fun when Mark arrives Saturday, probably Sunday, but maybe Monday. Thanks for that.